Okay, here we go to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a great new review for you from the brand Timex. Now, I haven't typically featured Timex too many times on the channel, apart from maybe some of their collaborations or special editions, but I have to say this particular release really caught my attention. This is their Expedition North Field Post Mechanical 38mm watch. A little bit about Timex. They were originally founded back in 1854 as the Waterbury Clock Company, then later transitioned into the U.S. Time Company around World War II before settling on the Timex Corporation name in the 1970s. Now, this particular type of watch, I consider it a classic field watch. Some key common characteristics and design language when you're looking for this type of watch: of course, you're going to want a more modest or vintage size style. You're going to have, of course, full numerals with a 12 and or 24-hour scale, and it's typically going to be over a black or white or creamish dial. Although since those classic times when this type of watch was first kind of rolled out, there have been a lot of different color variations we've all been able to enjoy. Now, this particular model, it's part of Timex Expedition North, and basically that whole movement is guided by a commitment to preserving the Earth's wild spaces. And this actual design was directly inspired by military-issued designs from decades past. You can actually get this for $229 direct from Timex, which is quite a good deal considering the specs. You can actually even get it for an extra 15% off if you join the mailing list, which for me was able to get it down to $194.65. So if you have more than one email, you can register for more than one time, so you can use that mailing list 15% off. Of course, while it applies, I was really surprised that it did apply to this newer release, but I'm glad that it did because that's how I was able to secure it so quick. So with all that said, let's zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, so as you can see, the backdrop here actually came with the watch itself. It is a nice little kind of custom bandana slash handkerchief, which is really nice. And I have to say that although when the way that it was packaged was it didn't feel as nice until actually I took an iron to it, and then it honestly seemed a lot nicer now that it was kind of smoothed out. So note to any of you buyers that are interested in getting this bandana, I definitely, for my time in the Marine Corps, I've used plenty of bandanas. You can use them when you're going through sand or anything like that, anything dusty. It's nice to have, although I'd say now probably most people just have face masks in general. But with that said, let's go ahead and move on to this beauty right here. So guys, check it out. Very, of course, I'd say recognizable design, and this is something that has been quite in fashion as of late because of brands like Hamilton and just a lot of other brands really emulating this very simple and very classic style. So it's nice to see Timex, a company that does also have a nice and well-storied history, partake in kind of reviving some really cool designs. And they have been, as of late, I'd say Timex has been doing some really great things in terms of what they're offering. And this is one of those, kind of new catalog items that I've, really been enjoying. It's not the perfect watch. $229 is a really great deal. The main thing that makes it so amazing is the fact that you're getting sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating. So that right there sets it apart from a lot of the competition that's out there. And I'm very impressed by that, especially at the price, and that it's also a name brand, which is great. So this has a 38mm diameter and it's 10.5mm thick. But then it's I believe on the site it lists it as 8.5, but that would be like minus the case back itself. So if you go case, mid case, and bezel, there. It's 8.5, but counting that, it's 10.5. So still not bad, and I think still quite thin and enjoyable. 46.5 millimeters lug to lug, so across there, that wingspan is very nice. You're going to get this in stainless steel. It does have a very nice matte blasted finish, and you can see it has a nice bright color and luster to it, which I can appreciate. That satinized finish, they're really well done, very very even and everything, and I think it looks good. As far as the crown goes, it's not a screw down crown. Of course, this is a hand winding watch, so chances are it wouldn't be, but it is a signed crown, which was a very nice surprise there. So very cool. I know that's something a lot of collectors are a stickler for, so you will be happy to see that it is a signed crown in this case. So very cool from that perspective. Now, the movement inside, although you can't see it because we do have a solid etched case back, as you can see there. The light hits it, so it's kind of multi-finished. You can't see the movement. I haven't opened the case back. I assume it's pretty similar to the movement that they use in the mechanical Marlins. And yeah, so it does hack and hand wind. I will say not the most pleasurable experience in either. In terms of the hand winding action, it's not great. And in terms of hacking, it is not necessarily consistent. Not to the point to where I'd consider it defective or anything like that. It's just a very, very, very low grade movement. I mean, it honestly makes you remember why mechanical watches and how they became luxurious in the past. And it was because brands like Rolex helped make them very consistent, and took kind of this very ornate mechanical movement idea and turned it into something that was very sporty and robust. With this movement, I'm certain it's, it's gonna last, and I'm not worried about it breaking down or anything like that. But I will say, comparatively to what's out there, whether it be Swiss or Japanese, it definitely lacks that refinement and just that consistency in function, which is something that I prefer. But for your average buyer here, or even if you gift this to somebody, whether it be dads and grads, etc., this will work perfectly fine for somebody. Some people probably don't even need the hacking seconds function, but for me, I did find the time hacking to be it required a little bit extra attention that I wasn't used to having to give a movement. I'm used to it being a little bit more consistent. I should say a lot more consistent, just from some of my other timepieces within my collection. So that's what I'll say there. It's you are saving money, and it's a decent trade-off, right? Because it is a Timex, and Timexes are a little bit more collectible than some generic micro brand that might be fly by night and might not be here tomorrow. So that is something, I think, a bit of a trade-off there, but not bad. I mean, it could also be that maybe I got a lemon of a movement. Let me know in the comments below if you've had similar experiences with your hand-winding mechanical Timexes as of late. But in terms of the dial here, guys, it's matte white. It's a no-date movement, no-date dial, as you can see, and it only has Lume, unfortunately, on the hour and minute hands only, but it does have 100 meters of water resistance, which is great. It has 20 millimeter lugs, which really makes this quite a strap monster. And then you'll see it mounted on this very nice eco-friendly leather strap. And in terms of what makes it eco-friendly, it's my understanding that in the ways that they treated the leather and whatnot, not using water, etc., is how it's eco-friendly. But it does have quick release spring bars. It tapers down to 18 millimeters, so it does have a nice little taper in terms of the way that it's going to wear and be comfortable on the wrist. And then it's about 3 millimeters thick, so it's going to offer you some stability as well, as you can see in the thickness. There you go. And yeah, it's not a bad strap at all. I wouldn't consider it some throwaway. I think it actually wears quite well, but why don't I show you guys how it wears by getting this piece on the wrist. Alright guys, as you can see on my 7¼ inch wrist, really wears perfectly. Let's be honest, 38 millimeters for a watch like this is definitely in those Goldilocks ranges, very classic proportions. From that standpoint, rides the wrist really well. Nice and flat, as you can see. Contours just wrap around the wrist. I got plenty of range of motion. My 7¼ inch wrist has it at the 3rd hole in. I could probably go 1 hole tighter, but this is a relatively new strap. It's not really worn in yet, so I'm not trying to, I mean, it's still warm here in California, so I'm sure I'm not down to my winter wrist profile. I'm sure there's still a little bit of extra little juiciness there on this wrist, but I think it looks great. And of course, with that 20 millimeter lug width, it's going to be extremely versatile in terms of other types of straps that can be worn on there. So I can appreciate that. And with its relatively thin profile, I think it's still absolutely fine in terms of, you know, nylon military style straps, NATO style straps. If you don't, hopefully you don't get sued for using that. That's a real bummer. Somebody copyrighted the NATO term in G10 straps, so that's why you see a lot of brands kind of trying to dance around that subject, unfortunately. But this is a great piece, and you can see the dial is very legible, and it does have some anti-reflective coating. Of course, on the studio light, it's going to be pretty impossible, but you can see here that it does render very clear. And even up close, where there's going to be some lens distortion and the watch will appear a lot larger, it still doesn't really appear oversized. And then, of course, when you get a little bit of better perspective there, I think it wears just about perfectly when you understand that I'm not just a floating wrist. There's a whole body attached to this arm. So with that said, let's go ahead, set up some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. All right, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, oh, wow, hey, I was wrong. There's actually Lume on the dial. It is just not very strong, so I can actually kind of see it here. Before I get into my low light transition, let me see if I can find my black light, and then I'll shine that on and we can, there we go. Just trying to get it at an angle here where it's, you can see those triangle pips actually do have Lume as well. It's very faint, so pardon me for not noticing that. Pretty much outside of this Lume test, especially just in a well-lit room, looking at this, I would have never known that those triangles, I mean, I'm glad that they are lumed. It's kind of the whole point, but okay, cool. There we go. So now they got a little bit of an extra charge. You can see them, but one thing I like to do here is work in some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. Maybe with this watch, but a lot of times you'll be, you know, maybe coming in and out of the building, walking underneath an overhang, the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite automobile. So you might spend a lot of time with this watch in less than optimal lighting. So I even like to get into some harsh lighting here, very high contrast, which typically would, you know, expose any type of production defects or anything like that. Everything looks very great, very solid, very nice from that standpoint. Again, with nice being, you know, it's a sliding scale, right? It's very nice for a $229 watch. Would this be a very nice watch for $1,000? Absolutely not. So let's make sure that we keep that perspective. But it is a very handsome watch, and I have to say these low light transitions are giving me a lot of just kind of, I could see this thing out, taking it out camping and watching the sunrise and just enjoying that beautiful dial and great color play there. So really nicely done from the standpoint of Timex. I can appreciate that, guys. So Closing thoughts on the wrist, very classic proportions, clean, purposeful aesthetic with definitely a very clear vintage inspiration. In terms of model variants, you can also get this in a blue dial, which is very nice. In terms of comparable models, there's of course the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical 38, which is around $525 on leather. So, you know, double the price there. That's pretty good, you know. You're getting a pretty good deal. You're also getting Sapphire, you're getting a recognizable name, Timex, Hamilton, you know, from that perspective. And then, you know, I think that's pretty comparable. In terms of quality, of course, the Hamilton will be a nicer watch, but if you're somebody that really isn't hugely into watches, maybe you're watching this video because you collect Timex watches in general, and you would never maybe even think about paying $500 for a watch, this might be something that's really motivating for you. So I think it's great, and especially if you're a collector and you have multiple watches, nice to have a couple of affordable options. So maybe you don't necessarily have to have the greatest iteration of something. You can have one that just gives you the similar fulfillment, and you know, and have a couple of iterations and a couple of, you know, you throw a pilot's watch in there, you throw in a couple different variations, and it can be a lot of fun. For me, guys, the bottom line on this one is that it absolutely nails the vintage military aesthetic, the design, the finish, you know, it all just comes together really just about perfectly. Apart from, I'd say, the really low grade movement that's being used, which is something that of course I'm going to be a lot more picky about, because I've just had a lot more watches, and I've had a lot of watches that were much more expensive, and typically I kind of avoid some of the lower grade stuff in terms of movement. You know, it's pretty easy to have a decent case and whatnot and put a Sapphire on something. It's easy enough these days for many independent brands, so it's nice to see you know, some of the bigger brands stepping up their materials and whatnot, and even offering a mechanical option like this. So with that said, normally I would actually sign out now, but I know some of you are thinking, hey, well, what about this watch and some competitors that it would go against? I've reviewed quite a few field watches on my channel. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and give you a little bit of bonus segment where we just kind of get some in-hand comparison, and you guys can kind of see how this watch physically fares next to some of its closest competitors. All right, guys, welcome to the bonus round. So one thing is you're going to see all of these watches featured on these Haviston general service straps. They're just winning. That's why I'm showing them on there, because that's what I leave these watches on. They are amazing. You know, in terms of that vintage military aesthetic, I think they really nail it. Here is one that is actually a gray dial Seiko 5 model. And it has this kind of bluish Admiralty gray that actually ties in really well to the strap. But as you can see comparatively here, guys, of course, these are both going to be very affordable options, very similar in aesthetic, but here you're going to be getting the day-date complication. Also, you're not going to be getting a sapphire crystal, so that's something to note with the Seiko, but the Seiko isn't automatic, so you won't necessarily have to wind it or anything like that, but here's how they look side by side. Now let's take a look at the actual case profiles. In terms of the thickness there, you can see the Seiko by comparison is actually, you know, I'd say it's quite a bit thicker. You can see that case back is almost protrudes as much as the, let me help it focus there, as much as the bezel itself, versus here you're seeing similar in terms of proportions, but just generally a thinner case back and thinner profile. Now, another option that would be directly comparable, especially in this particular color combination, Let's go ahead and make sure this focuses for you. Sorry about that. Is this BOLDR. Man, the BOLDR Venture, guys. I love this watch. This is matte blasted titanium. It's also an automatic movement. So again, in terms of comparing it to a mechanical hand wound, but it is a 38 millimeter diameter. Of course, it has much different lugs. It has this much more kind of modern industrial take, but the dial itself definitely pays homage to the same roots, and the color combination is also very similar. One other benefit here is you're going to be getting 200 meters of water resistance with a screw down crown, so very nice. And let's look at the side profiles here as well. You can see you have a lot more contours on this more angular case, which is surprising because at a glance it seems like it's a much more simple design, but you can see those contours are actually quite special and catch the light in really interesting ways. Even though this is matte and flat, in terms of its finishing, the way that it holds light and plays with it is actually still quite nice. You can see some great bevels there that do capture the light in really fun, interesting ways. And yeah, these are definitely very comparable in terms of, you know, there's a blue dial variation, black dial. You can get this also in a blue dial. So very comparable from that standpoint, and then pricing wise, very close as well. So something to think about. I know not everybody is going to say, hey, well, I really want to go get a micro brand watch, but this is a really great option, and honestly it's one of the best value propositions within the space. So I do highly recommend this piece. Now probably the most comparable unit here is going to be right here, guys, the Hamilton. This is an older Hamilton model. Basically the newer ones, it's funny because they've kind of went more retro and probably look a little bit more like this style of design. There's actually a Hamilton, this is also a hand wound mechanical, and this is Swiss, of course. But one thing about this is that it doesn't have any type of anti-reflective coating. And it also, since it has a slight dome to the crystal, it makes it it's double dome, which is nice. So there's less distortion at harsh angle. But I will say the reflection, it can be, you know, it's not as bad here because it's reflecting off of a black camera lens. But I'll say in practical situations, this little Timex here is going to ultimately be more legible more often. So I'll give the nod there. I will say that, of course, the Hamilton movement is a lot more robust. This isn't even the latest iteration. This one has a smoother seconds hand sweep, which is nice. The newer ones have a slightly slower beat rate, which ends up extending out the power reserve though. So this one has a shorter power reserve because it's an older movement, but it does have a smoother beat rate. But you can see very comparable, at least looking top down. Where you're really going to notice a difference is when you look at the side profile here. It's actually much thinner. I mean, well, I mean, maybe on camera it doesn't appear that much, but I have to say, using my eyes, not looking at the viewfinder, I think the Hamilton mid case is just a lot thinner. At least it visually appears that way. I don't know how it's rendering for you guys. Let me know in the comments below. Also, you're going to see drilled lugs, which is a very nice thing that actually all the other watches had. I will say though that this watch, out of all of them, although it is probably the most expensive, well, definitely the most expensive out of the group, it runs the fastest. Like this one will, if I leave this alone tomorrow, it'll be 5 seconds ahead of the others. So but yeah, one thing to note very quickly are all these three, to include this great Seiko. So you got of course mainstream Japanese, mainstream Swiss, and then a very, I mean, I guess semi-mainstream micro brand option. They all have drilled lugs, which absolutely do fit the profile for these types of watches, and they're amazing. There's, you know, they're out there, check them out. And this piece doesn't have drilled lugs, so that's not the greatest, but it's you know, it's a thing. I guess you don't really need them because you're getting the quick release strap. But you know, it would add a little bit of versatility. So appreciate you guys hanging out for kind of the bonus round here. Real quick, why don't I even show you guys this box? Kind of course, it's paper, no plastic. So just to go show you guys really quick kind of how this thing works and how it comes. Essentially it's all just kind of pushed in there, friction fit, and to actually take the watch out, you kind of have to slide everything out, which is a lot harder to do without the actual watch in there kind of holding everything together. I just pushed it all back in there, but it's very tightly fit, but it's all paper and eco-friendly, so for those of you that are into that, it's pretty cool. So with that said, guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.